Our studies in the book of Daniel continue, and we are at a place in the book of Daniel that would be familiar to a lot of people. Daniel and the lion's den. I need to take just a few moments to reset the historical surroundings of this book, and then we'll study from Daniel chapter 6. Historical background. There came a time near the end of Solomon's reign as king over the Jewish nation that division occurred. And there was the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom of Judah was conquered by the Babylonians. And as people were taken from Judah into Babylon, Daniel and his three friends were noticed and put to work in government positions. Daniel had special gifts of interpretation and prophecy granted to him by God. So far in our study, we have encountered episodes of Daniel interacting with Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Now they are gone, and as Daniel has prophesied, the Medo-Persian Empire is emerging, and we are first introduced to Darius. So, as we enter into chapter 6, Darius rules over the Medo-Persian Empire, and Daniel has a place of prominence that carried over from his previous role in the Babylonian administration. Here is an outline of what we're going to cover. We have a lot to cover in Daniel chapter 6. Listen now to the reading of Daniel chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Verse 6. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, verse 9, therefore King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, and makes his petition 3 times a day. Verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed, and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king, and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians, that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at break of day the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. Verse 22, My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad, and commanded that Daniel be taken out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. I have 2 questions to begin our study of Daniel chapter 6. These men who convinced Darius to make this law, what do you think their motive was? The word jealousy is not directly used in this passage, but it certainly seems to fit the behavior of these men who wanted to get Daniel in trouble. Remember, Daniel was not a native Chaldean, but someone taken from Judah. We know that God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs back under Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel was promoted up the ranks under Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. The native Chaldeans would resent that, and this behavior speaks to their immature rivalry and petty jealousy. It might be reasoned or inferred that Darius was an easy prey for this kind of intrigue. The other question I have is about Daniel. Do you think his praying started here after this law was made? We have good objective reason to believe Daniel's character and his reverence for God was a part of who he was long before this incident. There is evidence of the kind of man he was in the first 5 chapters of this book. But then also, note the way this is worded in verse 10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. So this was who Daniel was long before this law was made. Here was a man who continued to live in obedience to God no matter what kind of pressure or penalty or persecution. So here's what we have in Daniel chapter 6. Darius has some authority in the Medo-Persian Empire, and Daniel was one of the 3 appointed presidents. Other men in the government didn't like this, and so they conspired to find a way to get Daniel in trouble. Problem was, Daniel was a good man. He was, to use a biblical term, blameless. But they knew of what they considered to be his weak spot, but which was actually his strength, his loyalty to God. All they needed to do was get Darius to make a law against something they knew Daniel would not stop doing. This was their trap that they set. This law against praying would be of no benefit to the people. It had only one purpose: to get Daniel in trouble, to be rid of him. And they wanted the penalty to be built into the law and to be carried out with great swift purpose, cast into a den of lions. Remember, all of this is aimed at Daniel. And it would be immutable, no exceptions. It could not be changed. Even when Darius began to see that he had been used, and though he was distressed, stayed up all night, he couldn't change it. He was under the law of the Medes and the Persians. It was immutable. Of course, we know Daniel prayed just as he had done previously and had to be thrown into the lion's den. A night passes, and ironically, it was probably a harder night for Darius than for Daniel. In verse 18, the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Next day came. The king runs to the scene, and he yells into the den in anguish, asking for Daniel. I don't know how long it took for Daniel to reply. If I were directing a movie about this, I would write a good, long pause into this, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Daniel answered the king, "O king, live forever." Then Daniel explained, "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you. O king, I have done no harm." Darius was happy and could see not only Daniel's faith, but God's power, and that led Darius to say something similar to what other pagan rulers of the time had to confess, and that has to do with the power of God. In verse 25 to 28, then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwelt in all the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now, think about what we need to learn from this. I've made some notes. In verse 3, even pagan idolatrous people could see in Daniel an excellent spirit. I looked at several translations. The NIV, exceptional qualities. The New Century Version, he could do the work better. When people see us, they should see excellence as the people of God. Character, maturity, reverence for God, a healthy work ethic, a sense of justice and responsibility and love. This is the excellent spirit people need to see in us. And no decree of man, no threat, no oppression, no temptation should take us from the excellence that should be seen in God's people. Secondly, human legislation should never cause us to stop doing what is right. Right now, there is no law against private prayer. There is no law against the public worship that we engage in when we assemble as Christians. There's no law against the preaching of the gospel. But we don't know about the future. There may come a time when our conscience will need to cause us to violate the laws of men in order to continue to be loyal in obedience to God. Daniel did what he had always done, even though it was now for a time illegal. He was deliberately courting martyrdom or persecution, but it wasn't just a battle with men to defy the government. It was the steadfast devotion of his heart to God. And I hope in the development of our faith and our growth, Bible study and maturity, we are getting ready for this kind of test, even if it never happens. I hope it never comes to pass that men legislate against the fair and consistent expression of our faith. I am not completely cynical, but I don't know where we are headed. And even if it never happens, we ought to be maturing in our faith with such good progress. If private prayer is ever outlawed, it will not stop us. We will pray anyway, just as we did before. Here's something else that should ring in our ears and our minds. The last phrase of verse 23, because he had trusted in his God. That's the chief practical point we ought to take from Daniel chapter 6. We ought to continue constant in our prayers to God, praying without ceasing, maintaining righteous lives, being ready for any trials, believing with all our hearts that the Lord is able to deliver us out of any trouble that might come our way as a result of our loyalty to Him. Furnace of fire, lion's den, or anything equal to, greater than, or less than these. We are God's people who are ready for whatever pressure may be applied against the exercise of our faith. That's our study in Daniel chapter 6. Thank you for being with us.